Morning, kids. Today's a special day. There were 1,274 days between June 2016 and the December election in 2019 when the Tories promised to end the Brexit chaos. And today marks 1,274 days since that election. So given that the Get Brexit Done manifesto was all about helping the country move on from the arguments, division and the political and economic chaos of those 3.5 years, the question is, have the Tories ended the Brexit chaos or have they now simply doubled it? In other words, is Brexit done? And before we get started, I want you to understand why Brexit is probably the thing that we should be talking about most these days. Because we're in a poverty crisis, and yes, there are many major factors behind that, but the government can't simply stop the war in Ukraine. They can't simply delete the long-lasting impacts of COVID. But as the EU's top Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, confirmed last night,
the door is open any time.
The door to rejoining the EU single market is always open. So that's a button marked boost the economy by £100 billion and knock 6% off people's food bills, so we need to be talking about whether it's legitimate for the government not to be pushing it. Because the very existence of our current government is based on the idea that they're the ones who helped us get Brexit done and move on. And if you listen to our politicians and journalists, you think that it was just Remainers talking about Brexit that's keeping the Brexit debate open. And that if people like me just kept our mouths shut, we'd have all forgotten about it years ago. But in just the last 7 days, we've seen headlines like food and safety checks on EU imports still unknown, with food inspectors still unclear what they're supposed to do, especially with the start of Brexit import checks being delayed 4 times. And the government says they're working on inspection guidelines. That's a border control issue, so, you know, one of the core points of Brexit, and they still haven't figured it out yet. And we're still Jacob Rees-Mogg saying that when they finally do figure it out, it'll add up to 71% of the cost of food. 3 days ago, we saw the headline, UK government fails to comply with post-Brexit deal on EU citizen status. And last Thursday, UK factories sounded the alarm about their 16th consecutive month of their sales to the EU going down because of Brexit. And yesterday, the Parliament launched an inquiry into the effects of post-Brexit trade deal. Because it's bad enough that the trade deals they've done since Brexit don't come anywhere near close to making up for the economic losses of Brexit, but listen to George Eustace talking about how the deals they've done with Australia and New Zealand risk putting UK farmers out of business.
We did not actually need to give Australia nor New Zealand full liberalisation in beef and sheep. It was not in our economic interest to do so, that while we are about to open our market to unbridled access for Australian beef, not a single kilo of British beef is able to be sold in Australia.
So Brexit isn't just damaging the UK economy directly. The things that the government is doing in the name of Brexit are both damaging and divisive, like trying to send refugees to Rwanda at a cost of millions, because supposedly that's what people voted for in 2016. But what did they vote for in 2016? Because I toured Leave voting parts of the country as part of the campaign for a second referendum, and Leave voters told me they wanted 3 things. More control over their country, a better NHS, and most importantly, a way out of poverty. Taking back control of our laws? Well, last month, the Tories ditched their plan to get rid of all laws that originated from the EU, because under UK law, EU laws didn't apply here directly until the UK Parliament decided to pass them, so those laws are still on our books. The problem with getting rid of those laws is that A, it makes trade more expensive, because if there were different laws on either side of the border, then if you're trying to sell stuff across the border, that stuff has to be checked. Which is why UK businesses have been screaming for them not to do that, especially as the government's economists have been saying that Brexit is doing more long-term damage to our economy than COVID and has reduced trade by 15% because of the differences in laws. B, Boris Johnson's Brexit deal included a level playing field, which means you basically have to keep some of our environmental, consumer and workers' rights at the same level as the EU, or the deal allows the EU to put tariffs on UK products. And given that they're our main trading partner, things would only get worse for us. All of that adds up to the government being too scared to get the taking back control of our laws bit done. As for the NHS, the Nuffield Trust, the UK's top medical expert body, says that Brexit is damaging the NHS by making it more expensive to import medicines and by making the UK a less attractive place for EU doctors and nurses to come, which added to our staffing shortage during the pandemic, where our main weakness was a lack of NHS staff. So the whole helping the NHS thing? Not done. As for a way out of poverty, yes, you can point to COVID, yes, you can point to Ukraine, yes, you can point to the economic difficulties in other countries, but the simple fact is that Brexit was never a competition with those countries, it was a competition with the countries that we would have been if we hadn't left the EU. And every sector of the UK economy has been screaming for years that Brexit is making things worse. Fishing, worse. Car manufacturing, worse. Farming, worse. Small businesses, worse. Music, worse. NHS, worse. Hospitality, worse. And the Bank of England has confirmed that Brexit has increased food prices by 6% on top of the cost of living crisis linked to COVID and Russia. And the government themselves are saying that we're just seeing the costs of Brexit without the supposed benefits.
There would always be a short-term cost. And if you do it, you have to deliver a medium and long-term gain. And I think we're now in that very difficult bit where the costs are obvious.
So you agree with Chris that it is costing?
I think
it's that we are paying the cost of Brexit in our food bills.
I think it has had some cost.
Which is why Nigel Farage recently said,
But what I do think is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically. Brexit has failed.
Now go ahead, tell me that I'm forgetting immigration, because in 2017, I got Nigel Farage to admit that his line about the EU forcing uncontrolled immigration on us was a lie.
Article 7 of the EU Citizens' Rights Directive, which says that in order to come here without a job, you need to have sufficient resources to not become a burden on the social assistance system of the host country and have comprehensive medical insurance.
Femi, in theory, you're right. In theory, under European treaties, there are restrictions that can be placed.
Logically speaking, if the EU has restrictions on immigration and the UK hasn't been implementing them, leaving the EU would mean more immigration.
And would you look at that, immigration has gone up to record levels. And because free movement under EU law was mainly about helping people work and study in other EU countries, people who came here were more likely to be of working age than people born here. But the OBR, the government's official expert body, says that because we no longer have that system, that's no longer the case, with far fewer of those coming here to work or study. So while immigration is still on balance helping the economy, it's doing so far less than it used to. But I wasn't going to mention immigration, because if you could look at the fact that taking back control of our borders has left everybody poor due to labour shortages across the economy and cost lives by leaving our NHS understaffed during a pandemic, and you still think it's worth it because Nigel Farage said so? You're just a xenophobic fool. But the government's still saying they can fix all the above and deliver all the Brexit benefits they promised, and if you want to believe the same people who've lied to us for a decade, you go right ahead. But with the main objectives of Brexit all as failures, and the Brexit deal being renegotiated as recently as a few months ago, and the car industry warning that if it's not renegotiated again, thousands of jobs will go, no sensible person could look at that and say that Brexit is done. And the country can see it. 62% of Brits think Brexit is a failure, compared to just 9% who think it's a success. And 56% think it was a mistake to vote for Brexit in the first place, compared to just 32% who still think it's a good idea. And if you're sitting next to a Brexiteer right now, they're probably telling you, yeah, but how many people were in those surveys? I bet it wasn't 17.4 million, because that's how many people voted to leave. But that argument coming from Brexiteers sounds a lot like that kid at school that claims to have a girlfriend, but she goes to another school. Because it was Brexiteers that refused to let us have a referendum once Brexit had been negotiated, so you know, once people could see what it actually was. Because even Nigel Farage knew how that would pan out.
Remain wins that referendum and wins it every single time.
So polls and surveys are all we've got, and the polls have been showing that this country has believed that Brexit was the wrong call since 2018, which is why the majority voted for second referendum parties, meaning that if we had a voting system where all votes counted equally, we'd have actually been done with Brexit by September 2020. I'll leave a link explaining that below. So we'd still be in the EU, every household would be £1,000 richer, and we'd be out of this pissing contest with our closest neighbours. The Tories have doubled the chaos of Brexit, not ended it, and that was obvious long before now. So why didn't our news channels tell us that before the election? Because the main promise of the Tory election manifesto was to get Brexit done so we could all move on. And some of us did all we could to get the message out there that that was obviously never going to happen. Have we got our negotiating position agreed yet? No, which means we're going to be negotiating with the EU and arguing about this for 7 years if we have to go through with it. So that's how long it takes to negotiate the sorts of trade deals. But not a single news channel came out categorically with the firm position that the Tories were running their election on a lie. And if you watch the news this month, you won't find any of them talking about the fact that there were 3.5 years of Brexit chaos before the election, and now we've had 3.5 years since, and yet Brexit is still causing chaos and arguments, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the central promise on which the very existence of this government is based was a lie, because they've actually doubled the time that Brexit has been a source of political chaos. But if they told you the truth now, they'd open doors to questions as to why they didn't tell you the truth back then. Why didn't they inform a public that was desperate to move on from Brexit and still struggling with austerity-inflamed poverty that a vote for the Tories would trap them in this crap for years? But that's another discussion. I'll leave a couple of links below for that. Now, if you follow the maths in that tweet, there's a reason why I picked June 16th, 2016 as the start of the Brexit chaos, because that's the day that MP Joe Cox was assassinated in the final week of the Brexit referendum campaign. Because I think for a lot of us, that was the day that many of us woke up and thought, whoa, shit, this thing really is breaking British society. And the people behind Brexit knew that too. If you remember, there were two Leave campaigns, one led by Boris Johnson, the other by Nigel Farage. And here's what the communications director of the Farage one had to say about Joe Cox's murder.
Because we were so unsure constantly if we were doing the right thing, particularly when you have horrific incidents like Joe Cox, and you think, well, that's too much, and then the blame from the media. Out there, in the places where people had different reasons to the London, the Joe Cox thing was sad, dreadful, but it didn't change their views. There was no shift on the dial.
They knew they were breaking British society while they were doing it, and Boris Johnson carried on that role. For example, when the MP who took over from Joe Cox begged him to stop riling up Brexit supporters by using such violent language because she was getting death threats, his response was,
"The best way to ensure that every parliamentarian is properly safe and we dial down the current anxiety in this country is to get Brexit done."
Translation, you should support Brexit if you don't want something to happen to you. And they have the nerve to say it's Remainers like us causing the divisions in our country? They created the chaos in our country, got elected on a promise to end that chaos, and all they've done is double it. And we're paying the price for that with every bill that comes through our letterboxes. So get registered to vote now. Get some photo ID to allow you to vote now. Vote tactically to get the Tories out, and then make sure you stand with us to pressure Starmer's Labour to giving us the country that we deserve. But for now, have a great week.